Hey, everybody. Hey, yeah, yeah. Good morning. I'm Kotz. I'm one of the pastors here. We are in the middle of a series on Revelation. And yeah, for some of you, you're like, yes, let's talk about Revelation. For everybody else, it's like eating vegetables. Like, well, okay, some of you like vegetables. That's okay. But, it's like eating the thing that you don't want to eat, but you should be eating. That's what Revelation is to you. I'm so sorry. We have 3 more weeks of this. For the past 2 weeks, this is the 3rd week, we've been talking about Revelation. First week, we talked about like an introduction, how we should approach this text. And then for the remaining parts of the series, we are looking at themes. We're not going to spend the next 5 years going through Revelation. Instead, we're just going to pick out themes that are addressed in the book of Revelation. And you're going to discover that these themes are themes that actually are running through the entire Bible. And there's these loose threads at the end. And at the end, the writer, John, who wrote Revelation, he basically ties them up for us. And so we're looking at those themes. So today we're at theme number 2, which is Babylon and the Day of the Lord. And I would say about 50% of you are like, excuse me, what is that? You're like, what are we talking about today? And if you read through Revelation, if you tried to read it on your own, you probably came across these words, these terms. Babylon, Day of the Lord, and you're like, no, I want to talk about the mark of the beast. That's next week, so tune in for that. But this week we're talking about this because this is the biggest theme in Revelation. I'm going from greatest to smallest. This is the biggest theme in Revelation. It actually occupies about, okay, I'm not doing math in my head right now. I'm just going to randomly say like 75%, okay? Later you're like, oh, I counted the chapters. It's actually like 69.4%. You know what I mean. Okay. So, and I'll be honest with you guys, when I did my first initial draft of this message, I counted about 144 slides. So I tried to cut it down. I cut it down to 80, and my wife said, that's not enough. So we cut it down, but I still have a lot to go over. So if I'm talking fast, well, first, that's who I am. But secondly, it's on purpose. Okay. So let's get started really quickly. We're starting in my favorite book of the Bible, Genesis. This is the first instance of Babylon, and you're like, really? It's really in Genesis? Yes, it is. Okay, so this is the context of this is that there's Adam and Eve. They have kids, which are Cain and Abel. Cain kills his brother because they bring an offering to God, and God seems to favor Abel's offering more than Cain's. Cain is feeling insecure. He's like, I'm kind of jealous here. You know what? In order to secure my place in God's family, I'm going to have to get rid of my competition, which is my brother. Okay, so he kills his brother. This is the scene right after that. The Lord said, what have you done, Cain? Listen, your brother's blood cries out to me from the ground. Like, I could still hear your brother crying. Like, I could still hear him. What happened? What did you do? Next verse. When you work the ground, it will no longer yield its crops for you. This is a curse that God has given him. You will be a restless wanderer on the earth. Let's keep going. Cain said to the Lord, today you are driving me from the land, and I will be hidden from your presence. I will be a restless wanderer on the earth, and whoever finds me will kill me. Now, something interesting just happened in this story. Cain, in his own mind, no one told him this, but just in his own mind, and I'm sure most of us could relate to this, in his own mind created a promise. If I could just do this, then here's the promise that's given to me. If I could get rid of my competition, then God would love me more, right? Or maybe you guys had your own little promise you created in your own heads, right? Like, if I could just get rich enough, then I'll be happy. If I could just be attractive enough, put on enough makeup, or if I get surgery or whatever, okay? You guys have your own version of this. I will be more popular. I would be more fulfilled. I would be more satisfied. If I could just give in to the will of the people around me, maybe there'll be more peace around me, right? You create these versions of truths in your mind. This is called the promise of evil. And you're like, that doesn't sound evil. It eventually does become evil, but this is Cain's version of that. I thought I would find more security with God if I got rid of my competition, my own brother. But what happens here? Look right here. It says, it will kill me. Like, people will want me dead. Now I'm even more insecure. The promise was empty. Okay, and it actually fulfilled the exact opposite of this, right? So he wanted security. So Cain was lured by an empty promise. There's something about this scenario of murdering my brother that feels appealing to me because I like the end result that I might get that nobody promised me, but for some reason I feel like there's this contract that somebody made in my own heart, right? No one told him that if you kill your brother Abel, that Cain will be favored by God more. But for some reason, he created this reality inside of him, and he lived according to it. As a matter of fact, it became his obsession. Okay, so that's that story. Now, Cain had kids, and their kids had kids, and about 5 or 6 generations down, we have another story, and by then, we're at the epitome of human evil. Okay? So let's read that story. Now the whole world had one language and a common speech. As people moved eastward, they found a plain in Shinar and settled there. So they're moving eastward to this plain. Let's see what happens on that plain. They said to each other, "Come, let's make bricks and bake them thoroughly." They used brick instead of stone and tar for mortar. Okay, you're like, that's great information. I thought the Bible was supposed to help me get closer to God. Why are they giving us this information? Because when I read about bricks for mortar, bricks for stones and tar for mortar, I don't feel closer to God. Like what? The writer of Genesis is giving us some clues that's going to help us later on in the story. Okay? So bricks and tar, that's what they're using, because bricks are easier to build with. This is a verse about technology. They're developing technology that's going to help them build stuff easier, right? And I'm not saying technology is evil. It's the people who use the technology for certain things that make it good or bad. And in this case, we find out that they're using it for bad. Next verse. Then they said, "Come, let us build ourselves a city with a tower that reaches to the heavens so that we may make a name for ourselves." Not a name for God, but for themselves. What they're trying to do in this story is that they're trying to take the place of God. Hey, we think we could do better than God at this running the world thing. So we want to be God now. Okay, so they're building this tower, and that's what they're trying to do. They have collaboration from all of humanity because they all speak the same language. Then this happens. So the Lord scattered them from there over all the earth. He confused his language, and they stopped building the city. First mention of a city, and we might talk about that in a few weeks. Let's keep going. That is why it is called Babel. In the Hebrew, the word is Bavel. Okay, and that word sounds like the Hebrew word for confusion. So like, this is why they're called Babel, because they couldn't understand each other anymore, and now they're confused, okay? Because there the Lord confused the language of the whole world. From there the Lord scattered them over the face of the whole earth. Because when they use technology it's meant to help people, and they're using that to oppress people, it's a bad thing. Now, here's an interesting thing that you might not have known. Maybe you heard me talk about this before. The word Babel in the Hebrew, Bavel, is translated as Babel here in the English. You knew that. But did you know that this is the only place in the Bible where they use the word Bavel and translates it to Babel? Everywhere else in the Bible, the word Bavel is translated as Babylon. So when somebody says the Tower of Babylon, they're talking about the same thing as the Tower of Babel. Now, why did the author use the word Babel or Babylon? It's because Babylon was a civilization at the time this was written that were bullies. They were doing some really bad things. They were hurting people. They were trying to overtake other nations and civilizations, okay? So the Jews, what they did was they took the idea of Babylon and they made it into an archetype of evil in this world. Babylon is this is my definition of Babylon in the Bible. It's an attractive human system that devalues the image of God in others so that the oppressors can overvalue their own worth. What they do is they forget the fact that, or maybe they don't forget, maybe they just choose not to see it, right? They see that there is a human being right there, and they're thinking, hey, if I just ignore the value of that person, I could feel more like a god. I could feel like I'm superior to these people. I think I could boss them around in the way that I think they should be moved around so that it builds me up. And any civilization, any group of people, any system that has this set of values, the Bible always calls Babylon. Okay, and the Tower of Babel is the first example in the Bible of that. It's a civilization that was developed in the worst case scenario when Cain's descendants were living out the worst case. There's this one story in the genealogy of Cain. He has this great, about 5 or 6 generations down, grandson named Lamech. Lamech basically compares himself to his great-grandfather Cain and says, hey, if my great-grandfather Cain was avenged 7 times for killing somebody, well, guess what? I killed people 77 times. It's almost like a boast. Like, I'm better because I killed more people. It's a type of, like, I have more cred now, and I'm better because I'm killing more people. And the Bible is trying to portray that as, do you see how wicked humanity has become, that people are boasting and evil? Okay, so that's Babylon. The next time we hear about Babylon is in the book of Exodus. Let's go to Exodus chapter 1. By now, the Jews are now living in Egypt, and they're living in harmony with the Egyptians until this new Pharaoh comes in power, and this Pharaoh starts to feel insecure. Like, wait a minute, if there's a lot of Jews living in our land, And if there's another civilization that comes in and tries to take over our land, what if these Jews sides with them? We're going to lose our land. Oh no, right? So again, insecurity. So Pharaoh in his own mind creates this promise of evil. He creates this empty promise in his mind thinking, wait a minute, I know what we could do. If we oppress the Jews, if we are to enslave them, then we're going to be secure. Like again, no one told him that that's how it should work, but in his mind, he created this promise. We all do this all the time, right? So it says, so they, the Egyptians, put slave masters over them to oppress them with forced labor. Forced labor, keep that in mind, tuck that in the back of your mind. And they built Pithom and Ramses as store cities for Pharaoh. They're oppressing the Jews, treating them as slaves so that they could live a lavish life. Okay, let's keep going. They made their lives bitter with harsh labor in brick and mortar. Where have I seen that before? Brick and mortar. Hyperlink, double click it, it'll take you back to the Tower of Babel story, right? Right, we're doing the biblical scholar work right now. So they're basically, this is the writer saying, hey, do you recognize this? And with all kinds of work in the fields, in all their harsh labor, the Egyptians worked them ruthlessly. So what is the author of Exodus trying to tell us? He's telling us that Egypt is another version of Babylon. Are you catching on? Even though they're not called Babylon, we start seeing more and more Babylons in this story, okay? And as a matter of fact, we see Babylon pop up when the Assyrian Empire comes in, when the Midianites come in, when the Philistines come in. All these other enemies that we see in the Bible are different versions of Babylon, and they use similar language to hint and nudge and wink at the reader that, look, guys, this is Babylon again, okay? Now, when the Babylon Empire and the Babylon copies start to rise up, what does God do about it? Well, what does he do to Egypt? Well, he sends these things called 10 plagues. You guys probably know this story. Let my people go. No, right? That story. And quick recap of this. God sends like locusts and frogs and water turns to blood and there's, the darkness, the spirit of death, all these things happen. And we're like, God is so mean. Context. If this were to happen at the time, if you were there at the time this happened, people would say, God, why are you giving Pharaoh 10 chances to repent? It was an act of mercy back then. Okay, it's just so you guys know. This is not God being mean. This is God being gracious. He gives them 10 chances, and eventually these people are released, and Pharaoh's like, fine, I'll let your people go, and they go towards the Sea of Reeds, or the Red Sea. And they see the Sea of Reeds, and then they cross the sea, and as they're doing that, Pharaoh gets his horses and chariots, and he chases after them, right? And God's like, don't chase them, don't chase them. They're like, no, we're going to chase them. Again, that empty promise in their minds. Oh, if I could just get them, then we're going to be more secure. Which is weird because remember, the original thing was, there's too many Jews in our land. Well, now these Jews are leaving, so you're okay, right? It's like, no, we still have to destroy them. Like, these promises make no sense sometimes, but we do them, we follow them anyways, right? Amen? Yeah, it happens all the time. Okay, so anyways, the Israelites, they escape Pharaoh's army, and the Red Sea falls on itself, and then Pharaoh's army does the dead man's float, I think that's what it's called, right? And at that point, the Israelites, they sing songs, they celebrate. They're like, yay, this is great, right? And they're talking about how we're never going to forget this day. Even before this whole thing happened, God's like, make sure you pack up, bake some bread, and you will remember this day by celebrating this day every single year. And over time, the day that God destroyed this version of Babylon came to be known as the day. You'll find in Jewish literature, they refer to the day as the day that God destroyed some empire. The day, okay? The day is the day that Babylon is destroyed so a new world that God intended can sprout up. That's what the day is, okay? So now we know what Babylon is. We know what the day is. And over Jewish history, we'll see example after example of Babylon-like type empires and powers start to rise, and then God destroys them, and they call that the day. And they started praying for the day. They're like, oh, we want the day to come more often because it helps us, right? We don't like oppression. We've been enslaved so many times. Please, Lord, give us the day. But there's a twist to this story. And the twist comes in this part of the Bible, 1 Kings chapter 1 through chapter 11. Okay, if you don't know this story, I'll explain it to you really quickly. So by this time, Israel has their own land, Israel, okay? And they had a king. His name is King Saul. Not a good king. The next king, King David, awesome king, probably the best king they've ever had. After King David's reign is over, who's going to be the next king? Well, he has a son. His name is Solomon. How about him? He takes over. This is his story. Now, that night that he becomes king, he's like, okay, what am I supposed to do? And God visits him in a dream and says, Solomon, what would you like? I'll give you anything. You want riches? I'll give it to you. You want an army? I'll give that to you. What do you want? And he's like, well, you know what? I want, and he does this hyperlink to the book of Genesis. He says, I want the wisdom to know the difference between right and wrong, which was the exact issue that Adam and Eve had problems with, right? So as we were reading this story, we're thinking, yes, we finally have a king that is, where Adam failed, Solomon is gonna fix it, right? We're like excited about it. But as we start reading his story around chapter 5, we start to notice that there's something off, something weird about King Solomon. Check this out. King Solomon conscripted laborers from all Israel, 30,000 men. Now, did he ask for volunteers? Was he like, hey, if you want to help me build something, this building project, how would you like to join me? No, he is using forced labor. Where have we heard of that before? Let's keep going. He sent them off to Lebanon in shifts of 10,000 a month, so that they spent 1 month in Lebanon and 2 months at home. Adoniram was in charge of the forced labor. Again, why is this writer giving us all this information? I don't know. Let's keep reading. Solomon had 70,000 carriers and 80,000 stonecutters in the hills, as well as 3,300 foremen who supervised the project and directed the workers. Why are they giving us all this information? Is this helping us get to know Jesus and God more? No. Well, why? Let's keep reading. At the king's command, they removed from the quarry large blocks of high-grade stone to provide a foundation of dressed stone for the temple. Wait a minute. We read in the past about a group of people who were forced to, well, first we have a story of stone, and they're like, say, we're not going to use stone anymore, we're going to use bricks. And now Egypt is using bricks to make they're making the slaves, the Israelites, to make these bricks and then build these pyramids and big monuments, right? In the book of 1 Kings, we have an example of the king of Israel forcing their own people to, well, what's the next upgrade from bricks? High-grade stone. What are they building? They're building a temple? No, okay, Solomon can't be evil because he's doing God's work, right? So that can't be it. Well, let's keep reading. This is an interesting thing. Every year Solomon counts his gold. He always ends up with 666 talents. Another red flag. We'll talk about 666 next week. Okay? It even says that at one point, Solomon marries, he had many wives. One of his wives was the Pharaoh's daughter. You're like, wait a minute, we're in cahoots with Egypt now? And it even says that as a dowry, as a gift, the Pharaoh went out and annihilated a whole population of people in a city called Gezer, G-E-Z-E-R, Gezer, I don't know, right? And used it as a dowry and gifted it to Solomon, saying, this city belongs to you now. And he was like, I accept. And everyone's like, wait, there's something going on with this guy. Solomon is acting really weird. We thought he was the hope of Israel, but he's really not. He can't be. Is he turning into? No. Well, let's read this verse. Solomon accumulated chariots and horses. This is a symbol that they use to talk about Egypt all the time. And they're like, oh no. What's going on here? There's all these hyperlinks. You click on it and it takes you back to Exodus every time. What's going on here? This is what's happening. King Solomon accompanies God's work by utilizing slavery. They're building God's temple with slavery. Just because it has the label Christian, Jew, church, temple, doesn't make it holy. That there's still, like, what is he saying? He's saying this: God's people have become the new Babylon. They are enslaving people. They are being unfair to the people. They are oppressing people in the name of God. Right? Here's a quote from New Testament scholar Tim Mackie. He says this: the oppressed, which were the slaves of Egypt, the Jews, has become the oppressor. The people that God liberated from Babylon, which is Egypt, have become the new Babylon. So, what is God going to do with them? Remember, what did God do to Babylon? Well, he confused their language and tore down the whole tower. Okay, what did he do with Egypt? Well, the 10 plagues and then the Red Sea. Okay, well, what are they going to do with this? Well, eventually God sends all these prophets to Israel and the king and saying, hey, you got to shape up. One example of this is the book of Amos. He's a prophet. He claims that he's not a prophet. He's like, oh, I'm just a shepherd. I'm not. But he's a prophet because we think that he is. Okay, this is what he says. Woe to you who long for the day of the Lord. Every year, these people are celebrating the day that God freed them from Israel, from Egypt, when they're under slavery. And he's like, every year, you guys pray for the day of the Lord to come. The day. Remember the day? Every year, you're like, Lord, bring us the day. Bring us the day. And here he says, I wouldn't be asking for the day of the Lord if I were you. Why? Well, let's keep going. He says, why do you long for the day of the Lord? He's like hinting, like, are you sure you want the day of the Lord? Why when we want the day of the Lord? Well, because it says that day will be darkness, not light. This is the prophet's way of saying, if you keep asking for the day of the Lord, guess where the day of the Lord's coming to? You guys. But we're the people of God. It doesn't matter. No one is immune to becoming a Babylon. You have become Babylon. Don't pray for the day, because if you do, this is what's coming to you. And guess what? God came in and created certain scenarios where these other barbaric nations came in and destroyed their kingdom. Just because it has the name of God on it doesn't make it immune to becoming Babylon. So, in summary, because this is where we're going to end the Old Testament study, the hyperlinks, and now we're going to move on to the book of Revelation. Babylon and the day of the Lord. Okay, my summary of what it is this. Throughout history, God has faithfully destroyed oppressive forces. That's what you need to know before we go into Revelation. Yeah, we haven't even started Revelation yet, and we're already like 20 minutes into the sermon. Okay, so this is one of the themes that start from the beginning of Genesis all the way through the Bible to the end of the book, which is the book of Revelation. And John sees all these loose threads, and through inspiration from God, he's taking these threads and he's like, okay, I need to tie these up. So what does he do? Well, remember how I said that the day of the Lord and Babylon is the biggest chunk of the book of Revelation? It's from chapter 6 to chapter 19, and this is where John records for us what he thinks is going to happen to Babylon, the fall of Babylon. Okay, 6 through 19 is a big chunk. What is that? Like a lot of chapters for... 10 chapters. 11 chapters? Do you count it? Okay, anyways. It's a lot of chapters, okay? Well, the first section we're going to summarize, which is the biggest chunk, which is chapter 6 through 16. God brings these wraths, we're going to put quotes around these, wraths into the world. Okay? Wraths, okay? What do you mean by wrath? So, remember how we talked about scrolls a few weeks ago? So in those days, you have a scroll, and if it's highly confidential, you only want certain people to read, they drip wax in it, and they roll it up, and they drip wax in it, and it gets hard. So you have to break the seal every time you want to read on, and only the people who are allowed to open the seal are the people who are meant to read these words, right? So John is in a genius move. What he does is he decides to use these wax seals as bullet points. So the first seal breaks, and he's like, okay, so the first seal breaks, there's war in the land. You open the second seal, there's hunger in the world. He opens the seal again, there's darkness in the world, right? So he's kind of giving us bullet points as to what God is sending his way. And at the seventh seal, when you break the seventh seal, you're wondering what's going to happen on the seventh seal, the final seal. When he breaks it open, you find out there are trumpets. And he uses trumpets as bullet points. So the first trumpet is blown, and this bad thing happens. Second trumpet is blown, right? And then you get to the seventh trumpet. And then you blow the trumpet, and what happens? Bowls show up. It's like an image of God pouring out wrath from this bowl of wrath, right? And he pours it out, and 7 of those happen. Now, we're not going to spend time on all those. You could read that for yourself. It's a long section. It's chapter 6 to 16, right? But what you need to know as you read this is this, that this is a list of plagues that came upon the land in Egypt. It's a play off of this list, okay? And you're like, wait a minute, I read those chapters, and there's some things that's not on this list. You have to remember in the book of Exodus, when God through Moses was bringing these plagues, this list was basically a list of their gods, right? They had a goddess of the Nile River. And so, let me show you that our God is more powerful than your goddess of the river, right? And so these were actually a hit on the gods and goddesses. The list you're going to find in the book of Revelation are gods and goddesses that are represented in Rome. So that's just so you know, I don't see this on the list. That's what this is. Okay, so chapter 6 through 16, all this stuff is happening to the land. Now we move to chapter 17. Chapter 17 is when Babylon is exposed for what it really is. And I'm going to spend most of our time here today, although I already spent a lot of time. It's going to be here. Okay, so I'm going to read this with you guys, and I'm going to point out some things that are really important for us to remember as we read through this. Let's go. One of the 7 angels who had the 7 bowls came and said to me, "Come, I will show you the punishment of the great prostitute who sits by many waters." They often refer to Babylon, personified Babylon, as a prostitute because her power was attraction. Okay? Let's keep going. With her, the kings of the earth committed adultery, and the inhabitants of the earth were intoxicated with the wine of her adulteries. Kings of the earth are referring to world powers. So we're talking about Egypt, we're talking about Babylon, we're talking about Assyrians, we're talking about the Roman Empire, we're talking about all the world powers, including Israel at one point, right? They found this promise inside of them. If I could just get rich, if I could just control these people to build this temple for God, we will get what we've been looking for, right? The empty promises. That's what Babylon does. Like, oh, look at all these people that she lured to herself. Let's keep going. Then the angels carried me away in the spirit into the wilderness. There I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet beast that was covered with blasphemous names and had 7 heads and 10 horns. We're not going to get into the imagery of this that we talked about a few weeks ago. But so the scene here is the angel is like looking at John, looking at all these things, and it's like, I'm going to give you some more insight. So let me take you away in the spirit, and I'm going to show you what's happening behind the scenes. The woman was dressed in purple and scarlet. These are royalty color clothes, and was glittered with gold, precious stones, pearls, right? These are things that anybody back then, or maybe even today, will look at and say, oh my gosh, I want all of that. Gold, oh, pearls, oh, give me more. You know, like that's, you know, today would be like I don't know, In-N-Out Burger for me. Yesterday, I bit my tongue. I took myself to urgent care because I ate a double-double. It was so good that I bit my tongue, and I was bleeding. Okay. True story. If I talk with a lisp, it's because I have a tiny hole in my tongue right now. Gross. Didn't need to know that. Okay. Now, this is the key part right here. She held a golden cup in her hand. Okay, so just imagine there's this woman that's sitting right on 7 hills, and she's drinking this gold, and it's just like she has all this stuff, right? But what's in this cup? It's filled with abominable things and filth in her adulteries. Now, this translation doesn't do it justice. It does not. As a matter of fact, my favorite scholar, N.T. Wright, he points this out, saying like, this is not a good translation because it's supposed to make you say ill. So he tries to do that here. The eye of faith recognizes that the goblet is full of urine, dung, and blood. Sorry about the nasty words, but perhaps I should have used even nastier ones. Like that's the effect you're supposed to get. Next part of the quote. His point is that the outward appearance of the whore is magnificent, but the inner reality is disgusting, stomach-churning filth. This is what he's saying. He's saying that we make all these promises in our heads to ourselves. If I just do this, then I will get that. If I just marry the person that is handsome or beautiful or whatever, then my friends will look at me with more respect. Right? We make these promises to ourselves, but it's a promise of evil. It doesn't really fulfill. It looks attractive, and when you get to it, you find out that the cup is only filled with poop. This is the nature of Babylon. And this is why even Christians are not immune from this. We think, if we could just fill in the blank, if we could just have a worship leader that, I don't know, Daniel, taller? Sure, torn jeans with the tattoos, with a smoke machine, then people will worship God more, right? We would add God to it to make it, we justify these things. But you do all those things and you still end up being empty. As a preacher, if I was more eloquent, if I was maybe lost a few pounds, maybe if I had a British accent, which I'm really bad at accent, right? Then maybe, like, you guys laugh at this, right? But in my mind, I'm thinking, that's what I need to go to the next level. But when I get there, I realize how empty it is. This is the nature of Babylon. But imagine that happening on a governmental scale or an organizational scale or a civilization scale. This is what we're talking about. It gives you all these promises, but when you get there, you realize there's nothing there. And in case you don't know who this is that they're talking about, the next part, the name will be written on her forehead. It was a mystery. I'm like, I'm really not really a mystery because it's Babylon the Great. It tells you what it is. The mother of prostitutes and the abomination of the earth. Okay, so what do we have to know so far? They're exposing Babylon here. And what we discover about Babylon is this. The weapon of Babylon is her attractiveness. It's empty, but it's her attractiveness. if I wore better clothes, if our city had better leadership, if our church had a nicer building. If only, if you get there, then you're going to find out that the golden goblet is filled with dung. That's what Babylon is. And you believe in this false promise so much that you're willing to oppress people to get there. That's what Babylon is. Then, let's see what happens. The angel said to me, "Why are you astonished? I will explain to you the mystery of the woman and the beast she rides, which has 7 heads and 10 horns." Let's keep going. This calls for a mind with wisdom. You're going to see this phrase next week. You have to decipher what I'm trying to tell you. The 7 heads are the 7 hills on which the woman sits. What is he talking about? You see, at this point, John knows that this vision is about Babylon, right? And he's like, but you still need to decipher a little bit more to understand what I'm really trying to tell you. Well, what is it? No, we know the answer to this. He doesn't. We're going to let him catch up with us. A woman sitting on 7 hills is a very common image back then. As a matter of fact, it's on the back of a coin, right? You can't see the hills here, but she's reclining on the 7 hills, and her name is Roma. This is on the back of a coin of, on the other side is the face of the Caesar, right? The wisdom that John needs to understand is, look, Rome, when this was being written, Rome is Babylon right now. Roma was known as a goddess who brought peace, prosperity, order, victory through violence. If you want to become more powerful, conquer more land, oppress more people. And so he's like, guys, Rome is Babylon. That's the wisdom he needed, right? So now that Babylon is exposed, let's go to chapter 18. The celebration of the destruction of Babylon. Now, from this point on, John hyperlinks almost every reference to Babylon in the Old Testament. That's why it's so confusing, okay? So this is how it starts. Fallen is Babylon the Great. Well, how do they fall? What did Jesus come down and give them a smackdown? Like, hey, time's up, man, Babylon, gah! Is that what happens? But wait a minute, I thought Jesus is anti-violence. Like, well, what do you mean? How does he do it? It's really interesting how Jesus goes about solving this problem. The kings of the earth committed adultery with her, with Babylon, and the merchants of the earth grew rich from her excessive luxuries. Like, oh, there's all these people who root for Babylon because they're benefiting from it, right? Let's keep going. Then I heard another voice from heaven saying, "Come out of her, my people, so that you will not share in her sins, so that you will not receive any of her plagues." Hyperlink to the book of Exodus and also to the Noah story. Keep going. "Give her as much torment and grief as the glory and luxury she gave herself." These are the people of God saying, God, go kick her butt, right? Like, they tormented us, so let's give Rome double what she's given us. Let's just give her as much as, like, she needs to know how much she hurt us, right? Now, is Jesus going to do that? We'll find out. "In her heart she boasts, I sit enthroned as queen. I am not a widow. I will never mourn." This is them being boastful. Remember, we heard that's one of the characteristics of Babylon. Like, they never repent. They never say they're sorry because they're always like, no, we're exactly where we're supposed to be, right? Let's keep going. "Therefore, in one day her plagues will overtake her, death, mourning, and famine. She will be consumed by fire, for mighty is the Lord God who judges her." Now, I know I'm skipping around a lot, but there's this really interesting scene that happens around this verse. The people that benefited from the prostitute who is known as Babylon, they eventually turn back on her and starts to burn her down. Why? By the way, in case you don't know what God's wrath is, because I think a lot of times we think that God just wants to pour out wrath on everybody. In this case, God's wrath is allowing Babylon to suffer the destruction brought upon herself. If you read the scriptures, and if you especially read the writings of Paul, this is what you'll discover. Wrath is not God saying, here's your punishment, boom. 9 out of 10 times, maybe 10 out of 10 times, if I study it carefully, it'll probably be more 10 out of 10 times. We discover that God's wrath is basically saying, okay, I will let you destroy yourself. You've been destructive towards yourself this whole time, but I've been keeping it at bay. But now I'm going to take my hands out and I'm going to let you destroy yourself. That's what God's wrath is. And you're going to see that happen here. It says, "The merchants of the earth will weep and mourn over her because no one buys their cargo anymore." Right? Like, what empowered Babylon? Well, it's all the people who benefited from her. Well, what cargoes are you talking about? John lists us what cargo that they were selling. Cargoes of gold, silver, precious stones, and pearls, fine linen, purple, silk, and scarlet cloth, every sort of citron wood, and articles of every kind made of ivory, costly wood, bronze, iron, and marble. The list goes on. Cargoes of cinnamon and spice, of incense, myrrh, and frankincense, of wine and olive oil. All these things are wonderful things. Of fine flour and wheat, cattle and sheep, horses and carriages, and human beings sold as slaves. Right? Like this is, how we sell spices and, cargo and stuff like that. Oh, and also on the side, human beings. It's just showing how ugly this has become. And these people who made money off of Babylon, they will say, the fruit you longed for is gone from you. All your luxuries and splendors have vanished, never to be recovered. The image here is really important for us to remember, okay? Imagine if I was Babylon, the prostitute, and I'm using every kind of flaunting that I could use to get you to like me. It's like, hey, how's it going? Hey, come on. Okay, no one's falling for this, okay? But imagine if they did, okay? Come on, I have everything you want. Come over here. Yeah, you too, come here, right? And when they get to her, they discover, oh, Kos, you're just full of crap, right? Like literally, right? And so these merchants are starting to discover, all the attractive things that I thought about that you had, that you possessed, you don't really have it, so I'm just going to stand away from you now. That's the scene that John is describing for us right now. The promise that you made up in your own minds, if I could just do this, if I could just do that, if I just get the highest level of education, then I'll have this. All the promises you create in your head. Once you get there, you're like, wait a minute, this is worthless. Why was I even attracted to this in the first place? So the merchants who sold these things and gained their wealth from her will stand far off, terrified at her torment. They will weep and mourn and cry out, woe, woe to you, great city, dressed in fine linen, purple and scarlet. You still look beautiful, right? And glittering with gold, precious stones and pearls. In 1 hour, such great wealth has been brought to ruin. The one thing you had going for you, which is her attractiveness, is now gone. So now they're starting to abandon her. We were here because we got something out of you, Babylon, but now you have nothing to offer us, so we're just going to... Now Babylon the Great is not so great anymore. There's another group of people, the sea captain. Every sea captain and all who travel by ship, the sailors and all who earn their living from the sea will stand far off, again, abandoning Babylon. And this is what when they see the smoke of her burning, they will exclaim, was there ever a city like this great city? They will throw dust on their heads, a sign of mourning, and with weeping and mourning cry out, similar to the first one, woe, woe to you, great city, where all who had ships on the sea became rich through her wealth. In 1 hour, she has been brought to ruin. Right? This is the scene that John is describing for us. At the very end, everybody here, including myself, we have this false promise that's set in our minds. If I could just have a bigger house, if I could just have nicer carpet, I don't know, a nicer car, if we just have that, then, and there's that promise, right? There's going to come a day in the future where all those promises are shut down. And you realize what it is for what it is. Like, you realize it's not that attractive, actually. And so this eye for consumerism, this eye for just want, it's eventually going to go away. Let's keep going. Then a mighty angel picked up a boulder the size of a large millstone. Oh, and Jesus, he's gonna throw it at Babylon, right? Nope. And he's going to throw it into the sea. Why? Because he's just trying to make a point here. He's not here to destroy. And said, with such violence, you saw me throw that big boulder in there, the great city of Babylon will be thrown down, never to be found again. Like, you see how I just did that? That could be you next, right? The music of harpists and musicians, pipers and trumpeters will never be heard in you again. No worker of any trade will ever be found in you again. The sound of millstones will never be heard in you again. You're going to be desolate. You're going to be abandoned. Let's keep going. The light of the lamp will never shine in you again. The voice of the bridegroom and bride, the celebrations of weddings will never be heard in you again. Your merchants were the world's important people. By your magic spell, all the nations were led astray. This is the destruction of Babylon. Babylon just dries up. Did you hear that? Was that just me? That was just me? Okay, sorry. Okay. I thought I heard something. Okay. So, just as a reminder, we're coming to a close here. Just as a reminder, Babylon is an attractive, right? Attractive human system that devalues the image of God in others. That's why you're willing to treat people less, right? Like, I have a vision of what this world ought to be, and you have this false promise in your head. I think if we just do this, then the world will be better. You have this false promise in your head. And so you start devaluing people. For the sake of this one mission, I'm willing to devalue all these people because you're so committed to that mission, right? So it's an attractive human system that devalues the image of God in others so that the oppressors can overvalue their own worth. They start seeing themselves as gods. They start seeing themselves as people who are better than the people around them because they have the power to control for the sake of this mission, this goal in their minds. And this is really scary, right? Now, the scary part of this whole story, and this is the end of this Revelation part, now application. The scary part of this whole study of Babylon and the day of the Lord is that one part in the middle where we find out that the people of God has become Babylon. I mean, it's scary. The oppressors have become the oppressed. Oh, no, the oppressed has become the oppressors, right? And this means that the church is also not immune to being lured by the prostitute called Babylon. Now, if it's an individual thing, that's one thing. But if you notice what was being said in the book of Revelation, you'll discover that not one person was being called out. Systems were being called out. Organizations, civilizations were being called out. When a whole group of people believe in that false promise, that's when we see oppression rise up. Because we think we know what's better for them than what they think is best for them. So this is the question I've really been wrestling with this whole week, and so much that I had to text Daniel and saying, like, hey, I know you probably picked out your songs already, but there's this one thing that's really bugging me, and I need to talk about it. I don't know if this is going to change your worship set or not, but this is the question that really bugged me. What things of Babylon have we been praying for? You know, if I'm like, Lord, I want to be rich. And there's nothing wrong with money. Remember, it's the possessor of the money that makes money good or bad, right? Like, Lord, I just want to be respected by people around me. That's what I want, you know? I want to increase my worth. That's what I want. And you're praying and praying. That's okay. You can pray for those things. But what happens when Babylon comes knocking at your heart saying, you know, you've been looking for money? I got it right here. Stop praying to your God. Stop praying. Stop doing that, because I could give it to you right now, right here. You want your friends to respect you? Hey, if you do this, as a nation, the whole world will respect you. So we have to be very careful of the things that we ask for. I want to be healthy. Again, being healthy is a good thing, right? But what if somebody comes knocking on your heart saying, hey, just abandon the morals that you have right now, because if you just do this, if you oppress a certain group of people, that's more promise and security for you. So the question that I kept on asking myself is, what things of Babylon have I been asking God for? Comfort, money, security, maybe influence, right? And the greater mission question is this: has your mission for comfort, power, money, and influence come at the cost of neglecting God? Neglecting the image of God in other people. This is how religion can turn evil. This is how your good intentions can turn evil. Because you hang on to this empty promise, the promise of evil, in your mind, in your heart, and eventually you find out that somebody else is willing to offer that to you, and you're willing to neglect everything to go after that thing. In the Bible, there's a word for this. It's called idolatry. So again, the question is, has your mission for comfort, power, money, influence, popularity, whatever it is, has that come at the cost of neglecting God? I think this is something that's worth meditating on. Amen? All right, let's pray.